No matter the date, there's never a bad time to go back and revisit the big three of the boys' action figure toy space, namely Transformers, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. If you were anywhere in a toy aisle back during that era, you just knew that when you went into that boys' action figure aisle, you were finding a plethora of those big three all simultaneously. And if you were like me, you were wondering, what do I buy? There's too many options. How do I bug my mom or my dad to pick up something for me? Now, this is a special edition of the Toy Connections online live stream, or TKO. And the reason I say that is because we're going over to Grindhead Jim's channel afterwards for a special Sunday edition of Toy Grinds. So I'm just going to plus Grindhead Jim in as something of a co-host right away. Jim?
Hey, guys. Nice to see everybody here on a Sunday. Those of you that know me well know that I really covet my Sundays off. So it really took someone like Ken to see, like, hey, you want to talk about some toys? I'm like, I don't know. What toys you want to talk about? He's like, the big three. I was like, all right, I guess I got to do it. Glad to be here. Thanks for having us. And I can't wait to continue the conversation afterwards.
Yeah. Well, when I approached Jim a couple of months back, I'm like, I got this idea. I got TKO. You got Toy Grinds. What about TKO Grinds? And I don't even think I put an explanation. He's just like, whatever it is, I'm in. I love it. And of course, I picked a Sunday. I'm like, let's truly test Jim's love for this idea and the toys. And we're going to jump over at about, 5:30, about what time would it be? About 6:30 Eastern, I guess, would be 3:30 Pacific would be when we jump over. So we'll take a small break after this. But we got a couple other friends. We thought, who better to join us than two people who were either both patrons or channel members of Grindhead Jim and Toy Connections. They both have their own YouTube channels, but we'll start with our good buddy rocking his Santa beard well after Christmas, Wilhem Toy Hobby. Welcome back.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me. Jim, always good to see you.
Yeah. Sure. Always glad to see your smiling face here. So, yeah, and I'm not sure where he's gone, but you know what? He was streaming earlier on Weird Fantastic Toy Adventures. So if you're around, I think he's around. All right, Jim Largo from Largo's Lair. How are you, buddy?
I'm swell. Sunday with Ken.
Well, you'll have been on 3 streams today by the end of the afternoon / early evening.
Indeed.
So.
Yeah. Long time no see, Jim Largo. We got to get together sometime.
For those who don't understand the inside joke, they've got their new Action Force stream that they've got going. The first one of which was actually very insightful, and I actually enjoyed. And I think both Grindhead and I got confused because when they did that stream, they were live, but they weren't live. Right. It said live, but they treated it as a premiere. Like usually a premiere is the first airing of something, but they literally pre-recorded it, then aired it live. Right, as a live stream, and then they were answering people in the chat, typing away, and I was like, "What's going on here? I'm really confused." So,
and Jim could speak to the reason for that.
Yeah, they even told me like they were doing that, and I still was caught off guard.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was wondering how they were able to reply. Like their hands were clearly not on the keyboard, but they were both replying to us. I'm like, okay, so pre-recorded, aired live. And that's actually a really smart idea. You know what I mean? If you can be in the live chat, which you both were, which is great. So, but you said Action Force, and I opened a few of the ladies last night, put the gold head on the Steel Brigade and Pandora. Still got to heat them up a little bit more because, they're a bit stiff, but they pose really well when you get them in certain poses. So check out their Action Force, what do you call it? Lore. Exploring the lore of Action Force, because you both have the book.
AF, yes, we call it the AF3, a forceful fellowship for alliteration fans.
Awesome. And Grindhead, good to see you back after your battle with the amazing Corona, not so amazing Corona.
I thought if I put some limes in the bottle, it would work. It didn't. Knock me out for a whole week, and never again. I'm never trying that beer again, man. It's horrible.
Yeah.
The lime in the coconut.
That's awesome. All right, let's say a quick hello to the chat, and then let's counter the dispute that this is not the big 3 toys of the 1980s, because I know you all have your opinions on it. I don't mean you 3 on screen. You agree with me, but some of the people in the chat. So we've got Bjorn, Will pulling double duty, Bill from Weird Fantastic Toy Adventures, Jim, Largo, K-Dog Broadcasting says spontaneity.
Spontaneity.
All right. Cool. Times like this, I just tell everybody English is my third language because technically I learned 2 languages before I learned English. What I leave out is the fact that from the age of 4 onwards, all I spoke was English. So anyway, allows me to catch one stream or another given my work schedule. Now, if only I hadn't missed the Thundercat stream. Hey, there's a replay, so you're good there. Epic Badger, Jim Largo pulling not only double but triple duty here on being on both accounts and on screen. Our good buddy Gojatron, Skyfall, the latest member of the Toy Connections Patreon. Who else do we got? Sergeant Slaughterhouse tuning in from work because it's Monday overseas. Yeah. Grindhead Jim pulling double duty as well. Payne's Toy Samples. Kieran Ball, I don't think I've said hi to you yet. Yes, this is the first thing about the big 3, though I can't tell if that's sarcasm right there or not. TJC.
Kieran Ball is what it is.
It's Kieran Ball. It's a Kieranism. We got TJC, who I was talking to just recently. I already said hi to Bjorn. Everyone's talking amongst themselves here. Don't want to plus anyone in twice. Boba Hicks, Masterversal Toy Hunter. Boy, this is a busy one today. Emerald Knight Photos. Good to see you. Nolan as well. Oh my goodness, it just keeps going. Ratface44. I really hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Alf Inflict. Haven't seen that name before, but those of you probably know him or her.
Love this shirt. That great crust band.
Yep. Oh, my buddy's Customs Gamer Bud. Good to see you. Screaming Skull Saloon. Ozstradamus Toyz, who I just had on Friday night. This chat just keeps going. I'm not used to this, so let's. Jason Fitz. Okay. Treasures for Trigger. It's early where you are, man. It's like 6:30 in the morning over in Japan right now. So good to see you. Yeah, and wow, okay, this is quite busy. So I do want to get your thoughts as we go around the panel here, but I do want to say that I do see all the people saying that maybe this isn't really their big 3. So that's why I started my preamble with they were the simultaneous, concurrent, contemporary big 3 to each other between 84 and you could say 84 and 87 when He-Man died off. Not He-Man himself, but the line died off. But New Adventures came out in the late 80s, so you can argue that it went to 89. It's a weak argument, but it's an argument. And just because that was around the time, just before they deregulated the way that toys were done as a 30-minute commercial, it's just one of those things that, yes, it's not big 3 of all time, and it's big 3 of the boys action figure space. I'm well aware, as Kelly Remus, Sarge's daughter, always tells me, Barbie was bigger than all 3 of these. Now, we debated on this over a year ago. It wasn't live. I got my ass handed to me by her because her arguments were just better than mine, to the point I kept walking off screen in frustration. She won that. I'm a sore loser. Whatever. I don't acknowledge Barbie. We don't talk about Barbie on here unless you want to talk about Ken, because I'm a narcissist. But okay, sorry, inside joke vibes and everything. So a lot of people might feel that Turtles was a bigger franchise, which came right at the end of the 80s, or the Star Wars was a bigger franchise, but I found that was more of like, it started in the 70s, right? So I won't argue that Star Wars is the bigger franchise, but overall, the powerhouse in the toy house, I felt, was really of the 80s was really these 3. So
I think what makes it key, Ken, is the idea that you had this trifecta of cartoons and comic books and other media with these 3 in particular that really put them in the zeitgeist. So that's why they're the big 3.
Not to mention the fact that, as Ken stated, Star Wars started in the 70s and died very early in the 80s. Toy-wise. And then you, on the other hand, had the Turtles, who came late in the 80s but didn't have their heyday until the 90s. So I think the criterion here is the toy line started in the 80s, in the incarnation they were most popular for, and were in their heyday at their height during that decade. So we all love Star Wars. I think we all love Turtles on some level, but these 3 kind of they came to popularity, arguably crashed a little bit. Yes, superpowers. It's not even in the top 4, unfortunately.
I wasn't going to mention it.
Yeah, but you have Robin jumping around Dick Grayson like, "Hey, fuck Batman," Little Titans joke for you guys. I actually started watching. But I do feel like with G.I. Joe, and Transformers, and that other toy line that, I know nothing about, Masters of the Universe, they really did come out in the 80s, hit hard and fast, burned a bright light for the majority of the decade, and yes, they may have lived on in other forms before or since, but these really defined 80s culture in a way that few other toy lines can lay claim to.
Right, and even if you never saw the toys, it was on every lunchbox and Trapper Keeper, and they were everywhere. So they were the big three.
That's right. You got anything to add to that, Will?
Nope, I completely agree with them. And just from my perspective, every time I went into the toy aisle, or caught the cartoons, or TV shows, comic books was really my in. It was Transformers, G.I. Joe, and MOTU. Those were the ones that.
And this is a good point. The Turtles came out as a comic, but I think they really hit the mainstream when they weren't all wearing the same colored red mask, and you could identify the different colors, and you could identify the different the party animal, the leader, the sarcastic guy, and the genius, right? So I think that's when
they didn't hit the zeitgeist until that cartoon hit. Most people on the street didn't know who they were.
Like a lot,
they really apexed or 89, 90. So to say that the toy line dominated the 80s would be a complete misnomer.
Yeah, I would, that's a good point, right? Like, I mean, do I say that Transformers started with the Diaclone car robots in 82? It didn't. We always acknowledge it as 84, right? But it's a fair argument. If you were reading those comics, then it's a fair argument, right? But I think everyone's mileage will kind of vary on that. And the one thing that I will note is that what I do like about the interaction with the chat and even the disagreements is that technically we visited this topic. Me, Zazel, and Adam from Go Figure visited this topic last spring, but the channel was a lot smaller at the time and we weren't live. So we didn't get the, hey, my big three is this. Well, we didn't get that kind of interaction. So the fact that other people are sitting here saying, we actually have a different opinion from you, that shows interaction, it shows channel growth, it shows community involvement. So it's actually welcome. Anyway, go ahead, Jim.
And all respect to chat, I haven't seen one version of, well, you forgot. No one said you forgot, like in the top 10 list videos that come out. You forgot this. Like, no. This is just an agreed upon top 3 based on a certain criterion. Everything else I'm seeing in chat is super awesome. We just can't talk about every toy line during even the 2 streams that we're doing. So I don't mean to bury the lead, but for this particular part 1 of the show, we're doing all the vintage, and then we're going to look at the modern reflection in the next show. So we're going to refrain. I was about
to mention that, but thank you.
Modern reflections. So I just wanted to get that out there before we forgot.
Thank you. No, I was about to mention that, but thank you for being on top of that, because that'll be you're going to be hosting that particular stream. But again, I like the fact that the other opinions have come up, and this will be a topic that I visit with yet another panel, because technically this is my second time going through this, first time live, but second time in some sort of a panel setting. But why don't we all have varying experience with these big 3 franchises during our childhood. Now, why don't we each go and rank in our own personal minds which one was the most special to you, 1, 2, 3, as a kid? Because since the modern is later, Grindhead, let's go to you. Let's go clockwise.
So I'd say as a kid, between G.I. Joe, Transformers, and MOTU, my parents might say something different, but I really, really had it in for the Transformers as a kid. So there'd be number 1. And MOTU versus G.I. Joe, that'd be difficult, but I'd have to say G.I. Joe would be number 2 because I was really into the cartoons. And certainly I didn't have as many of the toys as I would have liked, of course, as a kid, but I had a lot. But then when we get to MOTU, I had a ton of those, and I loved them all through their time. I certainly love the cartoon as well. But what I think, up until the time I started collecting toys again, if someone asked me like my 2 favorite properties of the 80s, it would have been Transformers and G.I. Joe, hands down.
Okay, fair enough. Will, what about you? If you had to rank the 3 growing up.
Oh, it's easy. G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe and then G.I. Joe. No,
big surprise.
G.I. Joe is absolutely the best one, and I could go into a lot of detail. I even wrote some notes. But for me, it's the very best. Modern military action figures and vehicles. They had the best articulation, excellent playtime, scenarios. I'm sorry. I was reading the wrong thing. The best accessories, backpacks, helmets, weapons that were specific to characters, vehicles and playsets that were second to none. Great storytelling through the cartoons and comics. the file cards, blueprints, the stickers, assembling vehicles was like putting like snap together model kits together. I mean, I loved it. I ate it all up. It was my hands down favorite toy line of the 80s and possibly all time. Now, MOTU, I really liked as well. That would be my number 2, would be MOTU. They were larger than life. They were these fantastic characters. They blended sci-fi and fantasy. They also embraced the play sets and, yes, and they embraced the play sets and vehicles. Not to the great extent that G.I. Joe did, but come on, can we all agree that Castle Grayskull is probably the most iconic playset released in the 80s? I mean, that one is great.
I got a 7-foot aircraft carrier there that might dispute that.
Well,
but,
just for cool factor, I know, but accessibility, you know what I mean? I think it's the one that's more common.
When I ranked
Transformers would be a 3 for me. You know, just because price. They were much more expensive. I enjoyed the media, the comics and cartoons more than the other, than the toys themselves. There are specific toys that from the Transformers that I really liked, and then, just once again, I'm sorry to ramble here, but as far as playing scenarios like with my friends, we had massive playtime where we would take boxes of G.I. Joe over to my friend's house. We all lived within kind of 2-block radius there, so we hop right on our bicycles, have these massive battles in the yards. Not so much with MOTU, and definitely not with Transformers. One of the things that I noticed with Transformers were people didn't really like to play. Like I didn't want my friends trying to transform them after I spent all that time figuring out how to properly do it. So I don't think they went to the big battles or fun the way that G.I. Joe did. And that's all I gotta say. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all good. Mr. Largo.
Since I'm the crustiest one here, I'm the oldest.
Wait, I'm sorry. Sorry, I just want to address. I am 3D printing something. I'm so sorry. I noticed the chat. Just want to give everyone just real quick so we could, move on. This is a 3D model of Checkpoint Alpha from the G.I. Joe line. Nice. I am printing one in 1/12 scale from my buddy Jim Largo, and that's what's running right now. So sorry about that, guys. But,
no, that's totally fine. Everybody was curious about it, so that's cool. But is that 3 3/4 inch scale? I see. Curious that is it to make a different Checkpoint Alpha? Because I'm assuming Jim has, or does he not have a Checkpoint Alpha already? What's the story there?
What we're experimenting with is a custom. So what we're going to do is we're going to blow up Checkpoint Alpha to a 1/12 scale so that I can paint it and detail it to use with Action Force.
Ah, that's true. And I see the, you know what? Let's pull you up on Solo here, because I see not only the Steel Brigade patch, but I see that Wave 3 behind you as well.
Hello, ladies. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm loving them.
Yes, so, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll get to the modern stuff, but I'll bring up this was Joe when I was a kid. I was Adventure Team Fuzzy Head Kung Fu Grip Joe. So when the line died for me in like 76, I was still a youngin', and there was no Joe. And so by 85, I was an early teenager. I was about 14. So the brand recognition was there. And when I was a kid, Joe was just Joe. There was one Joe. Then you had Bullet Man and Atomic Man, a few others, but he was just a generic character. In 85, all of a sudden you've got all these different characters, and they all have their own file cards. And now we have, this explosion of great storytelling and the vehicles and everything that with. So Joe was definitely the one that was I tied into in the 80s. MOTU I loved because of the sword and sorcery aspect. I loved Conan. I loved some of those old type stories, and I definitely saw that in the DNA of what MOTU was doing. And Transformers, I'm a big robot fan. Always have been since back in the Lost in Space days when you saw B9 Danger Will Robinson. So when I saw what was going on with there, I was like, ooh, this is cool. So yeah, that's kind of my ranking order.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I don't think it surprises anybody that I would, and funny, I have to think about it now, but if I'm being objective about my exposure to it, Transformers would be number one. And it's just because my brother got out of toys at a very young age. We're 4 years apart. He was a few years older than me, right? But because that was the one toy line I got to play with him as a kid, and he sent me some of his toys as hand-me-downs. Like, I got into Transformers closer to 86 when the movie came out, but he had toys from 84, 85, and he would hand those down to me, so I got the exposure, and I would watch the reruns with him. Of course, the movie resonates with me. I very much got into the 87 Headmasters, the Target Masters, the Pretenders from 88, the Micro Masters from 89, 90. So I got kind of like that full experience with it plus the movie. And maybe there's a bit of bias here because like this is an 80s stream, but when Generation 2 came out in 93, I was 11 years old. I still was okay to play with toys. And when Beast Wars came out, I kind of aged out of toys, but it was so different and it had aged up with me. Like it was in that teenage analytical mind that came during that rebellious grunge extreme sports era of life. So that's why it's Transformers for me. Now, G.I. Joe, I got into a little bit closer to the sub-team, like Tiger Force, Iron Grenadiers era, but by then they were airing the reruns, but I just loved what they had. In hindsight, I actually think G.I. Joe's the better vintage line. I really do. Like, scale, everything was in scale. You didn't have, like these weird scales of robots that didn't make any sense. You could world build more. You could army build more easily. So I think Joe had more potential. It's just that I didn't get that level. I had to get that level of exposure on my own. There was no sibling to get me into it and influence me a few years earlier, right? MOTU would be third, but there was a time, like when I was 3 or 4 years old, I would watch the cartoon, and it was a simplistic enough cartoon that a 3 or 4-year-old could get into and be like, I have the power, by the power of Grayskull and all that. So I remember having MOTU figures when I was 3 or 4. So there was actually a time where it was my number one for a very short period. But overall for the 80s, it went Transformers, G.I. Joe, MOTU in that order, right? And because MOTU died out the earliest, I have the least memories of it, and then like TMNT kind of takes over around the time MOTU starts fading away. So I actually have more memories of TMNT than I do of MOTU in that era, right? So it's kind of how I feel about it. One thing I do want to plus in here though, and it's sort of on topic. I was going to save it for Jim's stream, but I realized I might forget a bit later on. I know, again, it's a little bit off topic, but you know how we're seeing a lot of figure swaps at toy stores nowadays? Somebody, sure. And I forgot who posted this, so if you're watching this, I want you to take credit for posting it on Facebook, but someone tell me what's wrong with this image. I mean,
this tattoo too big?
No, it's not that. It's they have replaced they basically took out the crappy version of Gung Ho and put the retro carded one in there. And it's like, you took the better one and returned it to the store?
That's why I mentioned the tattoo, because it looked like retro card. Like, why would you ever do that?
Yeah. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, why would you return that one? I don't know why. I just found it a little bit funny. That's all. So yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things that, like, if you were going to try to scam one of the stores, you actually gave them better value back. Like, I would go back in, I feel like, oh, I couldn't find a retro card. I'd actually buy this. I wouldn't tell anyone at the cashier's desk that, by the way, somebody replaced this, and I'd go home happy, right? Or maybe I'd make the purchase and then tell them so that they can't take it away from me. I'd be like, by the way, for your records, but I still get it. So
I didn't realize that Bizarro was into collecting G.I. Joe Classified. That's the only thing I could think of. Bizarro did it. Like, everything's backwards, Yeah,
Yeesh. Absolutely. It's like, anyway, I don't know. Like replacing it with a more valuable figure and returning it is just like, all right, cool. I guess to each their own. Emerald Knight photos. Maybe you can get this one. Yeah.
Eagle-eyed for that one.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of the media back in the 80s, were you cartoon first, toy first, or comics first, or all three? So, let's think about that. Go ahead.
In my case, I can speak to each of the lines, along the way. So, like Transformers, I want to say that I saw the commercials first, but then the cartoon followed closely thereafter. Um, my first Transformer, to my recollection, is Soundwave, and I was a huge fan of the cartoon through and through and through in '84 and certainly '85, '86. In '85 for my birthday, my mother got me the first 3 issues of the limited series run for Transformers, the comic books. We went on a trip to go to Pennsylvania, like a 5-hour trip. And she's like, "Here, you can read these." And I was like, "Oh." And I remember by the 3rd issue, and they have Spider-Man in it with the Transformers. I'm like, even as a kid, I'm like, that's a weird flex, but okay. And meanwhile, there's a bunch of army dudes all over the place, and I'm thinking, why the hell didn't they just put G.I. Joe in there? Like, that would have made so much more sense, but then my brain goes, ooh. So I started playing with my G.I. Joe and Transformers together as a result of the comic. So I would say probably the toy and the cartoon were very close together in terms of my exposure, and then the comic was like a year later. With G.I. Joe, it was similar, though I did have the toys. Rock and Roll is my first G.I. Joe. I had him before the cartoon came out. I got like right 82. And then the first miniseries comes out. Loved it. Then that really kind of bolstered the whole thing. And I really didn't get into the comics with G.I. Joe until probably 85. I had this orthodontist that was doing work for me and my sister. So anytime we'd go, he'd have this spread of comic books. You could just have one every time you went. It was totally cool. And I remember seeing a G.I. Joe and I said, what? I didn't even know there was a G.I. Joe comic book. What? And I freaked out and I read those. And I enjoyed them, but by then I was so ingrained in the cartoon, they kind of took a back seat. But as I've gotten older, reading those comics has been really cool. With He-Man, it was definitely toys first because the cartoon didn't come out until a year later. I had Castle Grayskull in Christmas of '82, that first year they came out. And but then the cartoon came out. I was like, aha, I'm validated as a fan. Yay, your investment has been rewarded, child. And of course they came with comic books, so when I heard about the larger comic books, I didn't care, because the mini comics that came in there really kind of drove things for me. But as a kid, I was always very critical of the comics that came with the toys, because they were in sometimes direct opposition story-wise to what the cartoon had.
No Prince Adam, for example.
A simple thing like Prince Adam with a blue cloak. He doesn't wear blue. He's a pink boy. And certainly, like, the early comics were a complete deviation from the lore that we know and love from the cartoon. Some folks, like Bill Wifta, is like, well, that is the lore to me. Like, the cartoon is, it's all a matter of age, exposure, changes your perception of things. But I have a reverence for the mini comics, even though I preferred the cartoon as a child. So they're all there, and the various attempts to make it a full-blown comic, I think, were laudable, but I never got into them.
Okay. What about you, Will?
Well, for me, it all starts with the comic, but more specifically, Marvel ran TV commercials for the comic. And that's what got me into it. There was an animated cartoon, commercials advertising the comic. So that was my first look at G.I. Joe. That's what really got me into it. It was the commercial for the comics and that commercial for the vamp. I remember running into the other room, trying to grab my dad, like, you got to see this. This is amazing, and trying to drag him in the other room. Of course, by the time he gets the TV, commercial's over. He's like, what are you talking about? So I'm like, G.I. Joe. I want G.I. Joe. He finds me a G.I. Joe at some store. I don't know where, but it was the big one. Probably new old stock sitting on the shelves. And I was like, what is this? I don't recognize this. This is not what I asked for. Probably the brattiest thing. I was probably 6 or 7. But, anyway, I did later on get that. My brother subscribed. Do you remember you could subscribe to Marvel and they would send the comics directly to your house? Yes, they would.
And they would swear up and down they were always mailed flat, but they never arrived that way.
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't really even think that way. I was like 7. I was just reading the stories, looking at the pictures more. You know what I mean? So I very much learned to read by reading comic books. So that was a great activity me and my brothers did. So I read the comics. obviously wanted the toys when I first got them. They were amazing to me. I absolutely loved them. Before that, I did have some. My brother was always building like airplane models and things like that. So, that portion of building the vehicles, applying the decals and snapping them together was one of my favorite, most rewarding parts of the toy line. But the media, the G.I. Joe cartoon, we watched it, we enjoyed it, but we also knew that it was a little, obviously like a jet would get shot down or a helicopter would get shot down and you'd see a parachute floating down. We noticed all of these things and kind of laughed about them as we were kids. So, I understand that was more for what they could get away with on TV, and that's fine. So, comics was my canon. That was the story I followed as far as G.I. Joe goes. Now, MOTU, I'm not a huge fan of the cartoon series. Once again, we watched it. It was a cartoon. It was on in the afternoon. Of course we're going to watch it, but sometimes we were also making fun of how sometimes it was like just kind of silly, some of the scenarios that would happen or, the way they did things. I liked the mini comics; those were really cool, and I liked the lore, the art styling on the package. The artwork in the books, really, really nice. I really liked that. And then I would say Transformers, media-wise, was just a tie-in because it was made by the same company as G.I. Joe. I think they came on right after each other, so of course we're going to watch it. But when I went to the toys. Do you remember that the artwork on the back of the Transformers toys where there's like that battle going on in space?
Yes.
Yeah.
I used to stare at that picture on the back of the packages over and over again. And just imagine what's going on in the scenario. Because you see like this guy's flying in this way. This guy's absolutely loved it. I liked what they did with the little power charge on the back of the Transformers with the little red thing, and you had to put that on there. But,
the tech specs decoder.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, with Transformers, like I said, Jim mentions, Soundwave, and, also one of the best G1 Transformers there is. I think it's probably the best one.
I managed to drop an accessory when I showed you the artwork, just because there's no flap on the side of this one. So if I disappear to go look for an accessory, sorry, I spent a lot on this piece, but you said artwork, and I started thinking, so I'm going to look for that before the vacuum cleaner gets it.
If we were ranking, like series, I would say for media, it's G.I. Joe Transformers MOTU. Yeah, and then that's all I got to say about it.
So we gotta put a fund together and get Ken a repro flap for that box.
I don't know if they made flaps for that box. Like, is the flap missing, or is that just the way they did it? Like,
yeah, you can see on the edge of the box where there was some cardboard sheared off. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not suggesting that he repair the box. I'm just saying get a flap with two, feeder tongues in it, and you can just put it on the end there just so it looks complete. But I know that people are like, that's the real reason I want to do it. I love hearing
that's a debate for another day. But we can all agree box art is a lost art, because box art used to be so much cooler. Definitely in the 80s. Yeah. For me, I'm like Will, comics. The comic books is where I learned about most of these before I ever saw the toys or the cartoon. About 10 years old, I discovered the local comic shop, and that was like, so cool. Mm-hmm. And I was I like DC, I like Marvel, but I was collecting DC Comics Presents because you get Superman plus whoever. And Superman number 47 was Superman and this new guy, He-Man. What? And it was this is pre-Filmation days, so it's Prince Adam wearing blue. There is no power sword. The only person who had half of the power sword was Skeletor. It was very much like the mini comic stories, and it was a good story. Prince Adam was more like Prince Valiant. He wasn't the wimp they made him in the Filmations, and it was a good story. It was a two-parter actually, because he came back a few issues later and they did another team up, and Superman helped find the other half of the power sword, which eventually they lost again. It was kind of like Ralph with his instructions to the power suit on Greatest American Hero. He kept losing the half of the power sword, every other episode. So that's where I first saw MOTU, was in the comic books in DC. And Marvel was just nailing it with all kinds of different new comics that were tie-ins, so Transformers and G.I. Joe, Larry Hama was the man when it came to G.I. Joe comic books.
Yeah.
That was like
Made
the first
line.
big name in comics. I knew.
Absolutely.
Like,
What
And the
a
file
great
cards,
guy.
and the file cards too, right?
because my brother
Yeah, the
always
file
talked
cards,
about
the
it.
storylines.
Larry Hama. You know, like,
Yeah, and
he was-
that's,
it was like
you know,
the
when
first-
I read the comic books, you know, I definitely got them, you know, a subscription there at the comic book store. I'm like, yes, I want this in my box every week. I'm totally there. I'll mow lawns, whatever I got to do to get this thing going. The stories were so good. So in a way, the Sunbow cartoon was kind of a letdown because, you know, Hawk was really the hero in the comic books more than Duke. And there were a lot of characters in the comic books that were explored, and you saw more of them than you did in the Sunbow. So, you know, and with Transformers, same thing. There was a serious storyline in the comic books, and there were a lot of tie-ins with things in the Marvel universe. So when the cartoon came around, I'm like, I like the comics better. And of course, you know, the G1 toys, they were neat, but they were very fragile. And it was kind of a disappointment.
Yeah.
And you know, you could see it even before it happened. The G.I. Joe Transformer crossover. It's like, this is inevitable. It's got to happen. They just fit together. Except in the toys they didn't, because the scale was just totally wacko. There was no way to get them to work together as toys. But in the comic books, it made perfect sense. But more Generation 2 is when they really played that up.
All right. Well, you know what? That's what I like hearing, because I've known other people before who said once they got into the Larry Hama comic run of G.I. Joe, the cartoon seemed cheesy. Nobody really died. You know, that seriousness factor was gone. You didn't feel that desperation because G.I. Joe would always save the day. I didn't get very far into the Hama run. Like, I've still got the first 10 issues in trade paperback form upstairs, but I remember it being very deep story. Like, I just took the characters more seriously. The idea of the pit was more serious. And of course, I read that closer to adulthood than anything else. Like, for me, the cartoons always created that canon for me. And then the playtime adventures with the toys in between, because, you know, you couldn't just get it on demand like you can today, right? Everybody knows. So I would like make my own adventures in the living room, or my friends would come over. So the comics came much later for me. So I ran into that weird gap where, like, if I had the comics, I didn't have the attention span to read them as a, 4, 5, 6-year-old kid. But then in my 20s, some of the comics came back, right? Like Dreamwave Productions and later Devil's Due. Not Devil's Due. IDW got the Transformers license for comics, and then G.I. Joe, Devil's Due, and then later on IDW got the comics, and I started to read those more. So it's hard to say. Like, comics for me feel like more of an adult venture for me than a child one. By the time I was old enough to properly enjoy comics, I was reading like Batman Nightfall, Death of Superman, Reign of the Supermen. But the toys very much are like my memoir to that era of the past. So that's kind of how I generally feel about, the lore. And everyone's headcanon is different too, right? Like, like what's the name of the female steel brigade above your shoulder there, Jim? Right? Like, I haven't even named mine. Say what?
Loretta. No, I'm kidding.
Loretta. Okay. All right. Yeah. God, I lost my train of thought for a second there. I knew what I was going to ask next, and then I started thinking about the name for. Now, all three of these franchises got movies between 86 and 87, so I do think that that's worth having a discussion as well. And I don't know about the rest of you. Maybe I'm just so biased, but like, because of the way the Transformers had the opportunity to kill off a robot, not a human, in Optimus Prime and many others, it immortalized him in our minds. Like, he became that much more precious. Like, you took him away in his prime. How dare you? No pun intended at all on that one. Wow. You took him in the way at the peak of his career, and you introduced us to this relic artifact called the Matrix before taking him away, therefore making him that much more important, right? And because of the rock
Hot Rod
music,
got a bum deal though. He was not the heel that he was sometimes portrayed as.
no, not at all. People tend to vilify him a little bit, but like
He was a turbo rotten young punk. And he
Turbo
knew
Rock,
how to pick up.
exactly, right? But like between Unicron and all that, I almost feel like the movie of Transformers gave us kind of more, right? And left us wanting more. Whereas like I felt that the Joe movie with Cobra Law, like maybe you like the creatures and the religion and turning Cobra Commander into a snake. And between that and like the over cheesiness and lack of Prince Adam in the '87 Masters film, I kind of felt like this is what boosted Transformers above for me. Like if you got three franchises that are that close and you're looking for a tiebreaker, that's a very big and obvious tiebreaker for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the Transformers animated film leaving us wanting more. And of the three films we're talking about, that one had the least amount of interference. They did exactly the movie they set out to do. Granted, it was for nefarious reasons that they got rid of characters, but they did it in such a way that really like took hold.
Such
I've joked
heroic
about
nonsense.
I've joked about the like the trauma and stuff like that, but that was real. Like I just saw this guy yesterday; he was fine, and now he's dead. And then you give us the Matrix, you give us a bunch of cool new characters, and then you get Unicron, which is like that's my guy right there.
And
Galvatron. And the thing is, I saw it in the theater, and the theater had one of those really good, deep, rich speaker systems. So when you heard anyone speak, it was booming in your ears. A couple years ago, I went to see it in the theater on one of those digital redos. It was just a stereo track, and it was like, this is great, but I could do better at home with headphones at this point. It was kind of disappointing that it wasn't even close to how I saw it in the theater. And then you come back with the Transformers cartoon series, season 3, they picked right up where the story left off, and you got all these new stories, and it really was like a springboard into more Transformers. Whereas with G.I. Joe, the animated movie, there was a lot of interference with the script. Yeah, it was kind of cheesy. I enjoy that movie for what it is. I love it. I take nothing away from it. But it ended in such a way that was like, like the cartoon didn't really move on after that. It wasn't like there wasn't a clear.
It ended.
It wasn't a clear post-movie thing. It just kind of the series just kind of died. And whereas with MOTU, that movie it was in development hell for 5 or 6 years. It was meant to come out in like 84, 85, which would have been excellent.
The popularity would have been yeah.
And it wasn't even a canon film first. It was in other studios and so forth, and they got screwed around, and then the art director's like, nah, it doesn't have to look like the toy. And they're like, yeah, it does. But then they're like, well, he can't kill anybody. It's like, okay. So imagine if they had gotten to do the MOTU movie in the way that the Transformers film was, where they just went nuts and just killed everybody off, got it in the prime of that license, and really did something extra super cool. We'll never know. But I will say that Frank Langella as Skeletor, masterstroke, perfect. A lot of people make fun of the makeup.
Yes.
I say, screw you, that makeup's perfect for what it was. Maybe not make him so bone white.
His Skeletor was definitely the best part of that film.
Oh, it's great. And there was so much of what they ended up doing with regard to location and story was driven by a lack of budget, because Cannon was just siphoning money off of that movie to try and fund Quest for Peace, and then did the same thing to Quest for Peace to get MOTU finished. The director had to pay out of pocket just to film an ending, so that movie was doomed more or less from the start.
Right. So the fans really got shortchanged. Yeah, for me, I'm the same way. Transformers was the strongest of those three films.
By far.
I think probably for me, too, it was the fact I'd already started experiencing anime in little bits. I'd seen Battle of the Planets, G-Forces, or Gatchaman, as it was known in Japan. And I love that style of the artwork. And I saw a lot of that with the way Transformers was animated. So that was a draw. And then, of course, the story was just better than the others.
Oh, for sure. Will?
Listen, Transformers the movie. Best of the three. Easily. I mean, the soundtrack, the theme. I was not bothered by the deaths. As a matter of fact, it like shocked me. I was like, "Oh my god, this is getting real."
Yeah, it was a
I
legit
liked
story.
it. It made me really more into it. And like Jim was mentioning, the follow-up TV series, I kind of liked how they picked things up in the future and kept going. I know some of the storylines got a little weird after that, but I love the one with the what was it? Snake Cobra Commander shows up and they're doing the Synthoid thing.
Oh, old Snake.
And
yeah.
we got
Old Snake. Yeah.
cussing. We got cussing in an animated movie.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Loved it. The
That blew my
soundtrack,
mind.
the animation. I loved seeing the characters and the stuff I liked with a crisper, better animation. You know what I mean? It was good.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I will say. So it would go MOTU movie and then G.I. Joe the movie is my least favorite. I did really like the intro to that movie though, and
The
I
G.I. Joe
loved
one.
and I loved
Everyone
the
did, yeah.
animation style. I mean, it was cleaner, it was crisper. The picture was better, the sound, the voice acting was better, but then Cobra Law, I just really wasn't into it. It could have been the age I was at the time too. What year was that?
87,
So
yeah.
12 years old. I was kind of also like on my way out maybe. When that Cobra Law stuff happened, I really just didn't like it. And I really wanted to like it because I was really excited for a good quality G.I. Joe movie. Because, like the animation on the TV shows wasn't always the best.
Oh, we got it 20 years later in G.I. Joe Resolute.
Yeah.
If
Resolute,
that had been
absolutely.
the G.I. Joe movie of the 80s, I would probably say G.I. Joe was the better franchise than Trent. That's how close those two are in my mind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
It's
Can I
it's like
just mention one thing about the MOTU movie, though?
Of course.
Post-credit scene.
I'll be back.
That gives it tons of points. I love that part. Because I
And-
remember the tape was on, and I was just like too lazy to get up and shut it off and rewind it because I had rented it. And I was just like sitting there, and then he pops up, I'll be back. And I was like, I love it. I love that part. That was so great.
And the funny part about that is that
Terminator
they had
style.
to get back together to do a reshoot for the ending, and that wasn't Frank Langella at any of the fight. It was a stunt guy the whole time. So I was watching one of the many documentaries that I have about Canon and MOTU, and it's somewhere in there I heard an anecdote that they had to bring Frank Langella back, do him up in the makeup for the 3 hours or whatever, just to dunk him in the water to come up and say that one or two times. So it was like several $1,000s just for that one setup. Because they
And if
wanted
I'm
to do
not
the stinger.
wrong, I think that MOTU movie didn't start off pretty good and then just kind of like
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
that beginning
They
fight
had a-
scene where they're like,
yeah, it was
storming
cool.
the-
And they had
pretty
this
good.
massive set for the interior of Castle Grayskull, and apparently there
Yeah.
were 2 other floors that they had built out for use. But with the budget cuts, they never got to use those parts of the set
yeah.
on film. So there's a ton of stuff that
And
just
I think
showing-
it's like a
yeah,
movie
done.
that just
showing they
real-
were
real
showing
good
He-Man as
up-
a he was a rebel leader. He was somebody in the
Luke
fight. I was like,
Skywalker.
ooh, yeah, there was some flavor there, and then it just kind of went, and then they went to Earth.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Found the
Courtney
money.
Cox before Friends. It's like because I got introduced to her through Friends, right? I'm like, oh wait, she was in the MOTU movie.
Right.
Like it's just little things like that you're finding after the fact. So
That and a little known TV show called Misfits of Science.
Yeah.
yeah, that one I don't know.
With G.I. Joe the movie, I think one of the things that they kind of dropped the ball on was voice casting. So their Unicron was Globulus, and he was played by Burgess Meredith. I'm like, that's not the voice you want for that character. I understand why he was chosen, but you want like a lot of gravitas to it.
As
and
opposed to
Nemesis
Orson
before-
Welles, right?
Yeah.
Right.
As Unicron,
You know,
right?
like and then you
Your
have
bargaining
Nemesis
posture is highly dubious. That's
Yeah.
line
But
in the
no
movie.
matter, I shall give you a new body and new troops to command. You belong to me now.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, for those of you who don't know in the
Dolph
chat,
Lundgren.
I own Transformers the movie on every format it's come out in except for Laserdisc, and I'm going to get one. I have the soundtrack on every format it's come out in multiple copies.
Can we do a
I'm
watch party, Jim? Grindhead Jim, please. Can we do a watch party?
Sure.
Stream? I love that movie
Yeah.
so much.
If you don't
No,
mind hearing me
because
recite
he's
every
going to
fucking
quote
line.
he's going to quote every
Yes,
line.
me
through
too.
it.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Let's set a like goal. Let's set a like goal, and if we hit that like goal, then Grindhead watches. Then Grindhead has to do the watch party. How
I'll
about that?
host that.
Listen,
Let's see.
Absolutely.
Let's see
In
how many
high
likes we're at
school,
right now.
When I was like running and I had to
45.
like jog and stuff for track and stuff like that, I would just recite the movie in my head. Get to the shuttles. It's
Oh,
only
yeah.
hope. Oh shit,
Yeah.
we're not gonna make it.
But with the G.I. Joe
Oh, no, you
movie,
don't
if
make
they'd
it,
have
John?
gotten some really solid casting choices for the voices, maybe Nemesis Enforcer has a voice would have been cool. Bring some more gravitas to some of that stuff. Do another pass on some of the dialogue, because even once they introduced Cobra a lot, like the scene where they do the spores to Cobra Commander, like that was like revolting as a child. I was like,
Oh,
holy
God.
shit, what are they doing to him? You know,
Yeah,
"No!"
it was really
and-
disturbing.
And
You
Chris
actually
Latta
start to
like
feel
sold it.
sorry for Cobra Commander.
yeah.
Yeah. And like they're saying in chat, like they didn't have a problem with Burgess as Globulus, but Don Johnson as Falcon. I think he was fine as Falcon, but they didn't need him. It could have been anybody. I think they needed to bring it because again, look at you got Chris Latta as a Cobra Commander, and I forget which Destro was in vogue at the time, which voice actor, but he's an amazing voice, you know. And then you have like feeble freaking Burgess Meredith, like, I am Globulus from Cobra La. And it's like, no. You're supposed to be in charge of all these guys. I expect you to have this big, booming voice.
I just didn't like Cobra La. Shangri-La, Cobra La. So this ancient society from, thousands of years old named themselves Cobra La.
You couldn't call it anything else.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with a better name.
I heard that Cobra Law was like a placeholder name, and then they just kept it. That's what I heard.
Yeah, I heard that they use it as like a joke, and then like some executive, or someone at the top was like, "I like that. That's really good. That's a new slap."
Now,
remember,
the only good thing that came out of that though was Serpentor Cobra. La, 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 la. Like that was funny.
That was funny as hell. That was funny as hell.
But again,
like when I'm,
like a lot of us say when we look at these modern comic book movies, it's like, you had the comic books. You had the Larry Hama comic books. You couldn't have picked one of those scripts and made a film?
Yeah.
Come on. The scripts were
We're
written.
going to touch on that in the next show. Trust me. I already have
Okay.
it. Don't worry. I got it.
what was the must-read story arc of Larry Hama's 80s G.I. Joe run? Jim? Is there a specific?
Specifically, focusing around... For me, it was the one episode where it's all about Snake Eyes. There's no dialogue.
Yeah.
The silent issue. The silent issue.
Yes.
Or silent interlude.
That to me, silent interlude. It's so well done. You don't need the dialogue. It was drawn and expressed in a way that it's like, even as a younger reader, I'm like, wow, I get it. This is
I'm gonna have to pick up the run somehow. People are saying the Barovia mission. Right, Cobra Civil War, which I think they had another Civil War in IDW as well.
Yes.
So I'm a little behind. Like I'm mostly the Devil's Due guy. But anyway, sorry. Were you still saying something, Jim? Or did you want to finish that?
Well,
thought?
just again, even with the Marvel comics, Cobra was much more of a threat. They were more menacing. There was something there that the Sunbow made them just villain of the week, and nothing changed. It was like, we're going to try to take over the world, Pinky. And it was just the same wacky adventure every other week. And in the comics, there was a plan. There was some sort of a machination that was going on. They weren't all just two-dimensional. There was layers, and you had things going on with Destro, and you had things going on with Cobra Commander, and you had all these subplots. It was good.
All right, fair enough. Do we want to set a like goal before we promise Grindhead Jim's watch party? What are we at? 44 likes now.
We're at 50 likes. So
We're
I would
50
say that I would say that's plenty. Not to mention the fact that patrons are going to get it.
And I just really want to do it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to do it. Like,
Okay.
Make no mistake. But if you want to be in on it, you'll have to join my Patreon. Ha! So we'll talk about that in the next stream. Now, I want to agree with Largo on the Snake Eyes bit. The silent one was certainly a great issue. Anything that delved more into Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, every time I saw it in the comic, which was sporadic for me, but going back and reading, I'm like, damn, these are good. But there is one issue I would not say is superior to any of this, but stands out as a kid because I read it, I was like, this is cool. There's one issue early in the series where Stalker and Bazooka and Scarlet are in this little suburban neighborhood, and it's a front for like a Cobra buildup.
Springfield,
And they
yeah.
get thrown into this jail, and they're on
no place like Springfield.
Visions, and they're
Dreadnoughts are wearing cop outfits, right?
Yeah, it was great.
In Worlds Without End, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
that's where I learned to love grape soda and chocolate donuts was from the Dreadnoughts.
And like I remember they had stale bread and water. And all throughout my childhood and to this day, anytime I take a slice of bread out of a bag of a loaf of bread and it's stale or stale tasting, I think of that comic book, and I immediately grab for a glass of water. And should I put it up against the light bulb now? You know, like it was just so.
Grab for a glass of water right now.
It was something really cool about that particular story that just resonated with me at the time. Because again, I think it was taken so seriously, and that is something that I think that's part of why you see the MOTU movie on the bottom of the list. It was they tried to take it seriously, and then their ability to with the budget got ripped out. But Transformers super serious as a movie. Anytime you saw any of these properties taken deadly serious, they resonated. And I think that's such a simple thing to not to ignore, but to forget sometimes that there all of the times the lore succeeded was when it was like taken deadly serious.
Can I just ask two things? I'm sorry. Just how long are we going? And then I just wanted to ask Ken, like, do we have a lot? How much more time do we have?
Oh, we were going to go for anywhere between 90 minutes to like an hour 40.
Okay. We got plenty of time then. I don't want to jump the gun.
Yeah.
Can we talk about
that's fine. Oh, you were wondering if we we're going to be done in an hour.
I just wanted to know if we were going to have time to talk about how we played with these toy lines when we were kids. Because
we do. And we will jump. I will happily jump to that next if you want to.
Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
Don't jump the laser shark. So, train of thought derailed. Thanks, Will. What was I saying? I don't remember. But I'm sure it was something very, mind blowing. Ken?
Well, how we played with them is definitely is definitely a topic that I do want to touch. The seriousness of the franchises, you're right. Like, it's easier to go back and watch a serious episode than a non-serious one. But I do want to talk about the headcanon of the big three as well, because we have canon we can follow, whether it's comics or cartoons. But why don't you start us off with the way you played with any of these big three, or all of the big three for you, Will? Why don't you start us off on that topic?
Oh, sure. Let me see. I'm not sure if I'm prepared to talk about this. Of course
okay,
I am.
fine.
No, I'm kidding. Of course I am. No, so and this was going back towards like which one was your favorite, and part of that, which one was my favorite, wasn't even so much which one I just liked the most. It's which one had the most influence with me and my friends. So obviously I have two older brothers. They were into G.I. Joe. I got a lot of hand-me-downs because we would get 3 different toys, and then they grew tired of them, and then I wound up with 3 toys. It was great for me because I was on the bottom of that thing. But all my friends had these as well. Like I said, huge backyard battles, tons of time. I don't know if you guys ever did this. Not every G.I. Joe toy came outside with me. There were some special ones that I didn't really want to bring out and share with my friends because, most scenarios were like, okay, you're coming over to my house Saturday. Great. Okay, we're going to start setting them up. Then we start setting them up, and I'm like, all right, my guys are over here, and they're going to attack over there. Then we'd argue for probably like half an hour or so about the actual rules of the battle. Wait, your truck can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. Okay, but he could fly. He can't, all these little arguments. Maybe have like a 5-minute quick battle. Then, one of our moms would be chasing us away because we'd be there for hours in their backyard yelling and running around, and they'd be like, time to go home. So then we'd start cleaning up. And then we'd have a debate about, wait, is this my guy or yours? And then it'd be like, no, this one's mine. I brought this over. And then, we'd always get them mixed up. And sometimes toys would go home with me, or, toys would be left there. And, it was all good. But, we would also do that at home as well. So G.I. Joe for me was the ultimate, playtime. We could set up. You could set it up inside if you couldn't go outside. You could bring them outside. MOTU, a little bit too. In third grade, some kid on the playground just said, "You like He-Man?" I was like, "Yeah, I like He-Man." He's like, "I have Castle Grayskull." I was like, "I like Castle Grayskull." He's like, "You want to come to my house after school?" Okay. I ran home, got my 2. I think I only had He-Man and Skeletor. Got them, ran up to his house. He told me where he lived. I think my brother went with me, and it was on his paper route. So got to the kid's house. He had Castle Grayskull. It was an amazing place. He had this big porch we could play on. We went there. I am still friends with this kid to this day, is what I'm saying.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had a great time. We met just that way, plenty of times, other toy lines as well. And him in particular, it was a really weird friend of mine. Not weird friend of mine, but we had a type of play that we did that was unique to just about anyone else. And, I didn't always talk about it. And it wasn't something we always shared with our friends, but we would actually role play our favorite movies, TV shows, and comics. But we kind of took it seriously. We would put costumes together. We would do this in his backyard. Sometimes if other kids from the neighborhood came by, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" We'd be like, "Nothing. Just forget about it." But that went on until we were like teenagers. And, we probably grew apart as we became teenagers. And, we've reconnected as adults. But, some of my most fun I ever had were, play sessions at this kid's house. And, the way we could be free and be kids was really great. And, I owe that all to MOTU. Now, Transformers, I don't think led to that group play experience, or at least not for me. Some people could have a different experience with it. But I will tell you, Soundwave was the ultimate Transformer G1. One, because he could do sidekicks. Yeah, you could take his legs because of the way he transformed and do like a spinning sidekick. So you could put that one leg up and yeah. So Soundwave sidekicks were the ultimate. He had the best articulation too. He had a AA battery that doubled as a shoulder cannon. Totally freaking awesome. And then the cassettes that transformed into things as well. And
that voice.
Yes, and Soundwave superior. Constructicons inferior.
Eject.
Yes. And he came with a little belt clip, so you could clip him onto your belt and pretend he's a Walkman. And he kind of did Walkman. And guess what? I knew no one was falling for it, but you know what? As a little kid, I clipped that thing on, and I thought I was getting over on everyone. Well, you think I don't have a toy in school? I do. We weren't even allowed to have Walkman in school either, but, it was
at least you carried him and not Megatron and Pistol.
No, not a good idea. Not a good idea. But, Transformers were difficult. Knowing how to transform something was almost like a badge of honor amongst me and my friends, where they were like, "How'd you figure that out?" And I was like,
I hated being that guy at school. So I don't know how to transform it. Give it to Ken.
Yeah,
they were being that guy at school.
But it was kind of like a Rubik's Cube or something. It was, in some ways, like a puzzle. But the only problem was the engineering of the G1 Transformers were engineered in such a way where, like, if you twist it while you were supposed to turn or you went the wrong way, you could snap a limb right off. I noticed when my kids were little in like the early 2000s, a lot of the Transformers they got when like those series came out, the limbs would come off rather than break.
The ball joint, yeah.
Which was a much smarter way of doing it. But I also noticed like friends, I'd go over their house, I'd be like, "Oh, you have this Transformer?" They'd be like, "Yeah, don't touch it," because it took me a while to transform them. I have them set up on the shelf the way I want them. Don't touch them, please. It wasn't like, "Hey, we're going to bring all these Transformers over and bang them together in the yard." They were more of a precious kind of thing, and that's just my experience with it. Yours could have been different. So, how'd you guys play? That's how I did it.
Who wants to go next?
I would say that when it comes to G.I. Joe, all of these toy lines, really, I was never a go outside and play kind of guy. Very few times would I be caught outside with toys. It just wasn't something, because I didn't want my toys to get dirty. I liked the accessibility of having the ability to make my own landscape in a room, whether it be the living room or the bedroom, and make the mountains and do all the things. And I was very much a solo player in that sense, because even though you'd walk by my bedroom, it would be absolute silence. In my head, I had all the right laser sounds and all the character voices. Everything was right there, and I was doing the whole thing. And when my friends and I would...
my brothers would make fun of me. They would come in the room and go, "Hey, Will," because I would do the voices and everything, you know.
But I would still do the voices sometimes. But it was more like on the playground. I have a very distinct memory of many times during recess, me and a couple of the kids get together, we'd play Transformers. And they always wanted me to be Prime. And I was like, because I also wanted to be a villain sometimes. So I would always go to like that one episode where Optimus got his mind controlled and like freak out on people and like, turn on them. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I bitch slapped Bumblebee more times than I can count on the playground. I was like, like, Prime, what's up? And they knew exactly what I was doing. You know, it was cool. So we did a lot of that. So a lot, like, very similar to where you were doing, like, almost cosplay role-playing.
Sure.
We didn't have the costumes or anything, but we were certainly role-playing the characters, and then that would inform the play with the toy later in the day or whatever. You know, play dates, for whatever you want to call them. I didn't have a ton of them, because when I would play with my friends in elementary school, we'd usually just go ride bikes and whatever. So, like, when you come home, you know, that was really more of that's when I would play with the toys, whether it was Transformers or G.I. Joe or MOTU or any of that. More of that, though, when I was younger, so like 83, 84, would be at home. I have some pictures somewhere of me and my best friend at the time playing G.I. Joe and MOTU outside and in the living room and stuff like that. But I guess when I was really, really young, some of my early Star Wars toys got messed up by myself or the dog or something, and something snapped in my head. I was never the kid that was like, don't touch that, but I did take care of my toys. And I did ask that people take care with the toys. They were allowed to play with them.
Did you rock Soundwave on your belt clip, though? Did you belt clip Soundwave on and walk
a couple
around?
times? A couple times, yeah.
Right. You're a cool guy.
Oh, yeah, of course. And for me, it was like basically I remember doing that specifically to kind of tip my parents off to the fact that I really wanted a Walkman. That's why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look, Mom, I've got a tape player. You know, and then sure enough, it didn't take long. But
all right.
It's the whole thing.
Well, for me, I was I had kind of a double whammy. I was a Navy brat because my dad was career Navy, so we moved every 2 years, like it or not. And so, you know, I kind of was limited on, you know, okay, you've only got one box. Whatever fits in there, we keep. The rest goes in the garage sale. So a lot of my classic toys ended up going the way of, you know, the garage sale kind of thing. So you pare down to the best of the best kind of core stuff. And I was an only child, so I didn't have brothers or sisters to play with. So my biggest thing was, you know, my books, my comic books, and my core key toys that I would carry along. And so when these guys came out in the 80s, you know, I was preteen, teenager, and I was at that tipping point where it's like, I still like toys, but I can't admit that because I'll get beat up at school. So with Transformers, it was like, okay, I like jazz because I like the car mode, and I can put that on my shelf, and it's a car. You could collect cars, that's cool. And nobody had to know it was a toy robot that I would play with when nobody's looking. You know, and then... you know, with the Joes, I still had some, you know, leftover Star Wars stuff that was still, you know, that I would cling to. And so, you know, the Star Wars and the Joes were close enough. You could kind of play and create your own scenarios. For me, though, it seemed like that was the point where I started going from just playing with toys to becoming a proto collector. It was like, Footloose, Flint, Lady J were big in the comic book runs that I liked. So those were my core characters. So I wanted those three on the shelf to look at as I'm reading the comic book. And I'm, you know, it was kind of those kind of things. So I started thinking like we think as collectors now, then, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And with MOTU, some of the characters were just goofy. I didn't like some of the villains, and I didn't like some of the, you know, even some of the heroes. So I wasn't crazy about the articulation. Once you've had O-ring Joes and all that super articulation, it's like the MOTU. It's like, they're kind of muscle bound. I'm not crazy. So
I went through the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would switch it up. Like sometimes I'd put my Joes away and be like, I'm playing with this from now on. But then certainly, when only a month or a couple weeks would go by, and I'd be like, there you are, my old friends, and I'd pull them back out and get excited for them again.
Yeah. Once I discovered Joe's after MOTU, it was hard to go back. As for playing with them, I always like having a little extra imagination, and I'm not sure whether this counts as a modern thing or a vintage thing, but when I opened up my HasLab Sky Striker yesterday, right, I'm going to full screen this one because I'm really proud of this right now, but the Wayne Ruffle or Wayne Ruffle, I don't know how you say his name, the pilot that came, the Rio, I guess, the radar intercept officer that came with Ace. Like, I didn't open, I left my Ace carded because I figured, I could use the vintage one and then just keep the other one carded. But like, this finally gives me Maverick and Goose. Finally. Right? That's what I like about, like, we talk about childhood play. I had a lot of childhood play, and it was like, well, who was going to be Goose today as a kid? And this was more my friends than me because they were bigger fans of Top Gun than me when I was a kid. But I understood the reference because the soundtrack was always all over the radio back in the 80s, right? But like with the toys, like for example, somebody, I might have mentioned this a few streams ago, but somebody mentioned that the 87 Worms driver of the Maggot looks like the Rocketeer. So all of a sudden that guy was a good guy. He was on the Joes and he was a Rocketeer. And, you could makeshift Top Gun into G.I. Joe. You could makeshift Rocketeer into Joe. It had the most opportunity for imaginative play and crossover. Sergeant Slaughter, the Fridge. You know what I mean? There's, Steel Brigade could be anybody, right?
Great personalities. Yeah.
I got a Sky Striker.
I know it wasn't
late.
Yeah?
Did you? Like super late, like would have been like 88 that I finally got one. It was in the box, and I remember I had the same dilemma that Ken did, but I didn't have one. But I always thought, man, Cutter would have made a good Goose. Like he survived the crash and decided I'm joining the Coast Guard. Screw this, and he would be like a good Rio. I don't know, but Sky Striker is still to this day one of the best toys.
It does lend to a discussion. I tried asking Chad about this on Friday night, but we had limited time. But like, I understand that the Rio is kind of based on old technology. It's based on the F-14 at the time, and like they have similar things now, but they're not Rios because the computer system is different. So they're not called Rios anymore. I think all of you have some form of military experience. No, but were you two in the military? You obviously are.
Yeah, these two guys. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
You did before you went to Guatemala. I think you did, right? Like I've between the group of us and the wall, I have never fired a gun in my life, right? I always say it's the innocent Canadian in me, but then other Canadians go, "Screw you! I fired a gun in my life." There you go.
Well, like like in the F-14, the Rio is almost akin to like a switchboard operator almost with some of the stuff they had to do back there. Versus, I'm not sure what the current terminology is now. They constantly change the terminology for different roles.
Yeah, Chad mentioned it the other night. Yeah.
But they basically are that kind of like a spotter, like for a sniper. Like they're there to like help with situational awareness and make sure that the pilot's aware of everything going on. But there's so much of that you could do, from a remote location like an aircraft carrier or something, that you don't really need to have that second person in there. That's why.
So that's why it's technically outdated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but was the Rio also a bit of a navigator?
Sometimes.
Okay.
To a degree.
Okay.
I mean, they did help with the flight plans and things of that nature. I mean, there's a lot of operations that they would do just so the pilot didn't have to think about it. Okay,
got it. I always wondered, right, because I just called it a co-pilot, right, which is, I think that's just the layman term for it.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's so one thing I do want to, as we're getting later into the stream here, I do want to ask, is there a vintage holy grail from each of these lines that you don't own that you wish you owned? I'm going to look at who's okay, you're nodding, so you're going first. Name one from each line that you want to own that you don't already got.
So with G.I. Joe, I'm close, but I want every single Marine from the line. I'm very close. I have Gung Ho in Marine dress. I have Leatherneck. I think I have a Gung Ho, and there's like one or two other ones. But that for me is like a big one. I also would never say no to a Terradrome. I love the Terradrome. Would I want a flag? Sure. Do I want the headache of putting that damn thing together? No. So, in terms of like attainable grails, like that's where I'm at. So with Transformers, I do want a G1 Soundwave again, for sure. And there was this part of my brain, like the Transformers that got away from me when I was a child was like Scorponok and his counterpart in the
Fort Max.
Fortress Maximus, yeah. Like when I was a kid, those came out, and I was like, "Oh, those are freaking amazing." Those are the only headmasters I was interested in, because I was like, "That there you go, like that's exactly what I should be getting." And my parents were like, "You're into these other toys now. Why are you gonna like put your last gasp of the Transformers with this and that?" I'm like, "But Ma, like these are amazing." Looking at them now, I'm kind of like, eh. But I definitely want to get a pretty minty G1 Soundwave. Okay. And for MOTU, I already have the Grail piece that I really wanted from the vintage line, which is the original Snake Mountain. And I also have a She-Ra Crystal Castle that was really important to me to have both of those. But if I had to like go with something I don't have, I mean, like Bill is saying in chat, Eternia would be cool. But honestly, I just want the boxes for all the play sets from the original line. Give me a box for every play set in the line in pristine condition, and I'll just keep the boxes. I'll be happy.
The box art was great.
Beautiful.
So good.
Yeah, I would say enough. For me, MOTU, the Talon Fighter. That was always my favorite. I never had one as a kid, wanted it. Now it looks like I might have an opportunity. With Transformers, his name just went right out of my head. The one that transformed into a laser gun, was it
Shockwave? Shockwave.
That was, to me, that was one of the coolest ones I never had. I had friends who had it. I was like, I'd play with it when I go to their house.
I had the Radio Shack knockoff.
Shockwave?
Yes.
Yeah. Galactic Man. Was it
Shack?
Yeah, I think it was Galactic Man that they named Shockwave. Yeah, anyway. Yeah.
And for G.I. Joe, I know it's kind of a running joke in some circles that when G.I. Joe went to space, it kind of killed the line. I wanted Defiant. Because I was a sci-fi nerd. I grew up, I cut my teeth on Star Trek, Star Wars, Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers. So when the Defiant came out, I was too old to get it, and justify it.
He is too old to begin the training. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, so that's my grail for the Joes.
Sure.
Well,
I'll tell you, for G.I. Joe, it's easy to say the flag. I mean, I would want more than one, grail there, because the flag, funny story was that I worked for a very long time to be able to afford the flag. And, it was really not a matter of money at the time, because I had put in almost all the money for it. It was when my parents found out that it was 7 feet long. And we did not have much space, and I didn't care. I was like, I still want it. They were like, hell no, you're not getting this. So that one would
I'll get rid of my bed. You can put this where the bed was. Yeah.
I worked that whole year trying to save up, and it was the first thing I ever tried to save up for and buy on my own, because I knew it was a big ask. But reality-wise, I would say the Terradrome. And I'll tell you, because my friend had a Terradrome. Spent a lot of time in his basement and in his backyard, setting up battles around that. And, not to bring down the chat, but my buddy died in 2002, and he was one of my best friends, and I lost him. And after his funeral, his mom said, "Would you want any of his stuff?" And I did want it, but I don't know. It was just too painful, and I told her, no, I don't want to go through it. And she had asked, because she said, you guys always spent all that time playing together, and I regret it to this day, not just taking his stuff and putting it in my collection. And that partial Terradrome would have been part of it, because by the time we were in our 20s, pieces were missing. But I have the Firebat. It's in my collection. I have his Firebat, which he gave to me when we were teenagers, because it was my favorite, mini vehicle. I loved it.
Yeah, it's so cool.
The Firebat's so cool. And then one day we were over at his house playing on his computer, And he was like, "You could just have it if you want it." And I was like, "I love the Firebat," because I was like, "Dude, I've tried to steal this from you so many times when we were kids." And then he just gave it to me. So I have the Firebat from his original Terradrome. So I would want a Terradrome. And MOTU, I would love a Castle Grayskull, just because, like I said, I have such strong connections. It caused it started a lifelong friendship for me, but I've never actually had one. And I would just love to have one on to display. It doesn't even have to be complete. I found a shell once at a flea market, but the guy wanted like $100 for it and it had none of the parts inside. And I was like, "This is like a shell," and I thought it'd be cool just to have as like a wall hanging piece.
Yeah,
and Transformers
that's the deepest part of the nostalgia.
I want a G1
the connection.
Oh, yeah, I want Jetfire / Skyfire, whatever you want to call him. That was the best toy. I had it. I still have one of his arms, and that's all that remains of him. I don't know what happened to the rest. But I would love to have one of them. But I want it like new in box, and I want to open it up just in that styrofoam tray and take it out just like I did when I was a kid.
Right.
So
I could never look
grails.
at Jetfire and not think Robotech, though. So
Ken, how much does that Jetfire go for? A lot, right?
Probably it depends, right? Like if you got the box and everything, probably about. Is it up to 300 US? I haven't looked yet. There was it was up to about 300 Canadian, like 250 US for a while. With the box and everything. I don't know what it is now, but that was about 2 years ago. So,
and all three of those are kind of attainable.
So
Joe Fest, I might be coming home from Joe Fest with a Terradrome.
In the meantime, though, when it comes to Jetfire, they do have a new version coming out that's around $90. It's more cartoon accurate. Yeah, I'll get you the link.
Ooh,
okay. Good. Well, you know what, K-Dog, don't worry about that plug, because when he put up that video about the Eternia during the Mattel Creations Kickstarter campaign, within days, I put up one on Deathsaurus during that campaign, and I referenced Pete's Chasing 80s video as the one that like helped the catalyst for me, because that video, that Deathsaurus video I did, got done in a day. And if Pete hadn't set the template for me, right, I would not have scripted it and filmed it as quickly as I did. So yeah, before we jump over to my holy grails, first off, I just want to say Emerald Knight Photos, thank you for the super chat. He says here, great stream and great conversation, fellas. Right, I think I met Emerald Knight Photos a few weeks back on Mega J Retro's channel. I was really chill that day. I was just sitting in my PJs against the blank wall with my poor camera going, I'm tired today. So I'm glad Emerald Knight Photos didn't take that as the way I always am. But again, I want to repeat, thank you for the super chat. Jim mentioned the Defiant, and when I look at Holy Grails for G.I. Joe, that would be my choice. Reason being is it's the one that's kind of eluded me. I don't spend a lot of money on vacations. That money tends to go to things like this. So I ended up getting a flag a couple of years ago. A little bit before that, I got a Terradrome. I have the 83 headquarters. I have the Rolling Thunder. I have the Mobile Command Center. What's missing from this list? A Defiant. And I've told the story a few times on Zazel's channel where in 1989, I don't know why it was still in stores at the time, my mom asked me what I wanted, and I went and I hugged and I kissed the box of the Mobile Command Center. Right across the aisle was the Defiant, and I always ask myself to this day, what if I'd chosen the Defiant? Because I've never properly played with one ever. Right? So that to me. By the way, I do have hardtop and payload. I do have the two pilots.
I don't think I've ever seen a Defiant in person. I've seen flags, I've seen Terradromes, I've seen Castle Grayskull.
It's almost like it's the true Grail, because it's the one that you can't find.
I can't remember ever like putting hands on one, or even knowing the rich kid that had one. You know, I didn't know any of the rich kids that had one. I knew 2 or 3 kids that had the flag.
What was it? The Crusader that came out was just the shuttle.
Yes.
Some people had that, but very few people had the whole enchilada of the Defiant.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Absolutely. Transformers, because I'm such a big fan of the Diaclone Battle Convoy, and what it represents as far as being Optimus before Optimus in the Car Robots line that came out a couple of years before Optimus, because that really set the template. You always hear me talk about Diaclone Battle Convoy. Yep. In fact, I'm doing a 10 Holy Grails video in the next number of weeks. Guess what's going to be on that list? And before I jump to that, I just also want to plus this in before it goes off of the screen. And Weird Fantastic Toy Adventures Bill says, first off, thank you for the super chat. Says, good stream, Ken. Please come visit me on my show and we can have a toy adventure together. And I was telling Jim, I watched a bit of your show earlier with Largo here, and I was asking whether the rooster that walked across the stream was the first time or just the first time I noticed it. Yeah, sometimes you stream at hours of the day that I can't catch you, but I always try to catch a little bit here and there. So at least I've, because I like seeing your chemistry with Jim. You're both more relaxed and a little more chill than I am. Whereas I'm always kind of going a mile a minute. You know what I mean?
No.
So it's good to see. Yeah, never, right? Ever try doing a video collaboration with me? It's people who have never admitted it, but it can be a bit painful with the script and me highlighting your exact lines. On one of my Transformers videos, I had somebody say, "Can I just rewrite the part you gave me, Ken? Because I can't talk like that."
Like,
and it made the video better.
We don't need those scripts.
Where no man has gone before. But thanks again, Bill. Appreciate that. So because I said that about Optimus, my Transformers Holy Grail that I don't have yet would be the equivalent, the Micro Change, New Microman, Megatron, the Walther P38. I don't know whether I want the one that's in the black and brown deco or the one that's in the silver deco that looks much like his G1 release. I'm not sure which one I want, but that would be my Transformer Grail that I really want.
When we get to the Grindhead portion of our afternoon, can you touch on the newer Diaclone stuff that's coming out?
I don't know enough about it. People ask me, I don't know enough about it. I haven't paid attention.
I would have thought that would have been on your radar. But
yeah. People keep mentioning it to me, and I keep missing out on. I keep missing out on it. Like I keep meaning to go look, and I'm like, nope, it's just don't know anything about it.
So it's on his radar, but it's an unidentified collecting object. That's all.
I'm waiting for my Rio to tell me what to do next, and since he's just new to my collection as of a day or two ago. Talk to me, Goose. Right? See, that's funny. To me, he's Goose. Yes, I know his name is Failsafe, but he's Goose to me. Right? In fact, his flight suit looks a little bit like Goose too. Yeah,
a little bit.
Right?
Hey,
just doesn't have the mustache.
Headcanon always trumps whatever the company puts out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Right. And for MOTU, it would probably be the Wonder Bread He-Man just because of the mystery. You can tell I'm a big lore kind of person. Right? That's why I appreciate what Largo and Will are doing with the new Action Force book. Right, because I love deepening the lore, exploring the franchise here and there. So when the Wonder Bread He-Man story came out, it was kind of like this great sort of like feel good thing, like was it a Wonder Bread promotion? Was it not? And then the classics one came with an actual Wonder Bread as the as one of the accessories, which is kind of cool. And I know that they've resolved that it was never really a Wonder Bread promotion, but the fact that the Wundar name stuck from classics to origins is really great. And just seeing it on Toy Hunter, because I'd never heard of it 10 to 12 years ago. And when Jordan uncovers it and goes, wow, this is a rare toy. I'm like, what is that? It's like, it's a Wonder Bread He-Man. I'm like, I've never heard of this. Right. So yeah. And K-Dog, I will put out a review in the next day or two. That was literally the thing I was doing before we jumped on this stream was editing and laying down the audio for that video. There are some QC issues. I've had no deal breakers though, like no double right arms.
Did it pass the smell test? Because that new plastic smell with a fresh toy, it's nothing like it.
Nice. What have you been?
Doesn't smell like anything. So I guess it didn't, right? And yes, TJC, the Wreckers video is coming out too. So
he doesn't smell like anything either.
Yeah, there you go. Right there are issues with it, but like for example, the front landing gear doesn't go all the way in. The wings are really hard to get in, and like the paint on the face does not have the same it doesn't jump out as much compared to. It almost feels like that they went with the minimal paint on the face. I mean, that may be a bit hard to see. And you can tell that he doesn't have that extra sheen. It's a very dull plastic as opposed to the sheen, that shininess you get in the 80s toys. So this is all stuff that I noticed. None of them are deal breakers because for me, buying the set was about getting a more decked out Sky Striker, getting Goose, getting Flight Suit Scarlet, Night Force Ripcord, the landing crew Cobra. That's what that set was about for me. If it expands my headcanon, my lore, that's why I back this one. And you get 7 figures for this, so
it's an homage to what you loved about the O-Ring Joe.
and it added characters and versions of characters to it. And the fact is, like, if you had to look at HasLab that are not a ripoff, I know this was stretch goal considered, but when you get 7 figures, even if you only valued each figure at $20 each,
Yeah.
which secondary market be damned, but that would be like $140 7 times
just in figures,
just for the figure. So is the Sky Striker with a stand and all the blast effects and the extra tow vehicle, is that worth $90 US to you? Right? That's where it's a bit more subjective, right? And I don't think those figures are worth no, that's not true. If they came out at retail, they'd be worth $20 each. So I don't want to get into the price thing too much. But anyway.
Right.
Hey, you buy what you like. If you could afford it and you want it, get it and enjoy it. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, does anyone want to say or plug anything that they're working on before we take a quick break and hop over to Grindhead stream?
Yeah, I'm working on starting that stream here in about a half hour or so. So yeah,
Perfect.
Hey, that's swell.
Awesome.
Matter of fact, I posted the link here in the private chat. I don't think I have privileges to post that link, so everyone can start heading that way.
No, but I can. I can. And Will, I think you might have moderator access.
And I'll
So-
take care of that. I'm sorry.
You okay? I was gonna say I can. I can post that if you want, but
No, I got it.
you got it? Okay.
got
Cool.
So just to let folks know, what we're doing is we're going to be looking at not just reflecting on the toy line from the 80s up, but mainly looking at where does it stand now? What are the strengths?
Yeah.
What are the weaknesses? How do we feel about it today? So we hope that you'll join us over there and have a slightly different conversation with the same group of guys.
Mhm.
But otherwise, you can catch me every Monday at Toy Grinds Live at 6 p.m. Eastern every single week. And then once in a blue moon, I do a video. You never know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just
absolutely.
happens.
Well, I think this first half of TKO Grinds has gone very well. Like, it's hitting me in the feels, and 90 minutes has already gone by, and it feels like it's been about 30. You know, I always say that on these streams. But I'm good to wrap up here and take a bathroom break. Not that I didn't already take one in the middle of the stream when I walked off, but you know me. Like, I theorized.
Figured you had to go tell Rolf to calm down. I know he's been getting rowdy in the background.
Yeah. He always is. That's Ralph for you. So, you know, I always theorized I was born without a bladder, but you know, my doctor told me otherwise. So, yeah. So, Jim and Will, are you working on the next sort of like lore update?
I'll let Jim. Yeah, I'll let Jim explain it because it's his show. I'm just his little partner there. So.
It's your world, homie. I'm just living it. Yeah, we're gonna not this Monday, but Monday week. We will go into just the generalities of what's going on with the world, what's going on with the United States, what is New Colonia, you know, what's the base of the lore. Explore the lore. We're going to see where does this, you know, what is the setting that all of this is taking place in, and then we'll start launching into, you know, a little bit deeper dive. We don't want to spoil the book because the book is excellent, and it's very.
I might have to buy it. And I'm also curious because Pandora is kind of her own unique character, but she is like she has some tie-ins to Kryvak in the issue she's in, and I wonder if
she is very essential to the overall story arc. I will say that.
Is she part of the book too? Like, is she in Bill's in Nedro's? Okay, good. And would it be wrong canon-wise to display her with the New Colonia and Swarm? Would it be wrong, or does she fit?
She would fit more with the Garrison than she would Swarm, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the Garrison Swarm are all kind of together in New Colonia, right? Kind of, right? I know it's a gray area.
Yeah.
I know not always, but not necessarily. So, yeah. All right. Thanks, K-Dog.
Just give Pandora her own shelf because she does her own thing.
She does. Yep.
Oh, this is good. I didn't realize that you can actually post links if you're not a mod. I think they don't allow you to post like offsite links, but I think they let you post YouTube links because it's YouTube for YouTube. Okay, I didn't realize that, so I was like, okay, well, thanks, K-Dog for doing that, and subscribe to Grindhead Jim, Largo's Lair, and Wilhelm Toy and Hobby. I think we'll call it here, and we'll see you all in 25 minutes. How about that?
Hey, thanks, guys, and thank you,
Sounds
everyone
good.
in chat. I really appreciate it. I was reading the chat as well.
A lot of
Great
fun.
comments, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers,
everyone.
guys.
Take Take care. See you soon.